Hello and welcome to Forever Cricket on Forever Sports. And today marks the start of the PROTEAS versus Ireland T20 series. 3 T20s this week. Monday, Thursday, Saturday is the schedule. And the PROTEAS have got no sort of alternative. They need to go out and win 3-0. They really, really need to do. I mean, a week ago, we were busy talking about the fact that they were going to try and sort of get first blood in the test and in the ODI series on the Tuesday, and then they went out and lost to Ireland, which I think, was quite a sort of shock and a bit of a wake-up call at the fact that this Ireland side cannot be taken lightly. And as a result, I think we will see a pretty strong Proteas side today in terms of the T20s. Probably not too many changes from the T20 side that beat the West Indies, because the West Indies are the defending World T20 champions. And, as we all build towards the World Cup towards the end of the year, you've got to be started fine-tuning your side and knowing exactly who your strongest 11 is, which I still think, Faf du Plessis obviously comes into the mix. I don't quite know what the story is then, why you haven't seen him, because he isn't technically supposed to be available for limited overs cricket. So whether he'll start coming into the side as we start progressing or something like that, but he definitely is, good enough to be in that T20 side. I think he's good enough to be in the ODI side as well. But before we look at the teams and what we can sort of expect and stuff like that, please do smash a like on the video, subscribe to the channel as well. We will have the post-match conference and a review and stuff like that up tonight as well. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel, stuff like that, so you are up to date with what is going on with the Proteas. So in terms of your sort of team news and stuff like that, I think this is probably what we're going to see. I think that, Yannick Milan's made a big case for himself. So I mean, you might be able to see him, but I think that, they were very adamant that Temba and Quinton de Kock will be opening tonight. That will be the opening pair. We know this. Temba said that he was going to be moving up to the top of the order at the back of the West Indies tour. So the only sort of question mark is at 3. If you're going to put Aidan Markham at 3, or if you're going to put Yannick Milan at 3. But Rassie van der Dussen stays at 4 for me, and I think, Dave Miller is pretty solid in that number 5 position. Needs to do a lot better after a pretty poor West Indies tour. But, I think that he's such an important part of the T20 side going into the World Cup, and it's so important that he's on song, that they probably will give him another chance tonight. And then I think we probably go 2 all-rounders in George Lindy and Vian Mulder. Vian Mulder just seems to have a knack for taking wickets. The alternative is to bring in Pet Lecquire. But I think, given the fact that Pet Lecquire had 3 games in the ODIs, it'll be a nice chance to bring Vian Mulder into the line and see what he can do. Equally, I think Kagiso Rabada and Nokia comes in. They probably stay with Lungi and Gidi as well. The alternative is there to bring in another all-rounder. You could play Pet Lecquire instead of Lungi and Gidi, for example, or else you could try and bring in Lizard Williams. And then obviously Tabraiz Shams, the number 1 T20 bowler. He will be very, very crucial tonight. So I don't think we'll see too many changes in terms of what we saw against the West Indies. But I think, the big thing is to put Ireland to bed. We want to be aggressive tonight. So that means that, the opening pair, we've got to use that power play properly. I think the West Indies, the reason that we were quite successful is, for a change, our power play was quite good. The problem is then sort of the back end of the innings that kind of fell apart. But, I think it's the power play is such a big opportunity to put pressure on the opposition side. If you can get a good power play done, it reduces the chase. And it puts you definitely a leg, one leg above the rest in terms of, setting a total. So it's important that they target the power play. And I think that Temba Bavuma and Quinton de Kock bat very, very well together. Because at the end of the day, if you can take, 4 singles and 1 boundary every sort of over, or 5 singles and a boundary every over, that's already sort of almost 8-9 runs and over. So you can already be sitting at that 50-60 point after the first 6 overs, which is where you want to be, and then you can try and put another sort of 120 in the remaining sort of 14. So I think that's probably the thinking there. I think Temba Bavuma is a very good foil. I think he rotates the strike very well. He's a very clever batsman, so he can find gaps, stuff like that. I mean, he's shown a little bit in terms of his power hitting, but he definitely doesn't have the power hitting that Aidan Markham and Quinton de Kock has. I think that he obviously needs to step up tonight. I think Aidan Markham needs to show what he showed against Pakistan tonight. And then Rassie van der Dussen is someone who's probably under a little bit of pressure in terms of the strike rate. He's been our best batsman for the last sort of 24 months really. In the Proteas side, but I think people are sort of criticizing the way he goes about things, the fact that he's not necessarily, his strike rate doesn't high enough and stuff like that. And then somebody who's under a lot of pressure, even if he gets the nod today, is David Miller, who is supposed to be, sort of the killer Miller, the Miller time, back end of the innings, really sort of taking a game away from a side or else chasing down the final sort of runs. He's an all or nothing player, really, isn't he? Either comes off in spectacular fashion or he doesn't really come off. He brings a lot in the field. I mean, we've seen him win a man of the match just from his fielding itself. But I think fielding is something that we need to be a lot better at. I think that Ireland, on the last game it looked a lot better, but genuinely the fielding was pretty slack across those ODIs. And I think that you've got too many good fielders in that side not to be a top fielding side. Temba Bavuma and Dave Miller are sensational fielders. Aidan Markham has usually got a very safe pair of hands, as does Rassie van der Dussen. So we've got to make sure that as a fielding unit we really, really back up our bowlers, because every run counts when it comes to T20. So saving that 1 boundary could be the difference between losing. Cutting those down, those 2s into 1s. It's just those small sort of aspects. You got to make sure you take 10 catches in innings, and you've got an entire team out. So we can't afford to sort of drop big players and stuff like that. And You know, you've got to treat this as a warm up to the World Cup. So it's got to be as intense as possible, and we've got to make sure that we see some really, really positive cricket. You know, we can't be. It's the final stages, but we can't have major issues in our game. You know, you've got to try and get yourself towards a pretty finalized unit and sort of say, right, we've still got these small things to worry about, but genuinely we know exactly how we're going to play. We know exactly what the stories of our game. You know, we know where we are in the field. We know how we're going to operate in the field. We've got to start putting the finishing touches on, because I mean it's the end of July next week. And you know, the World Cup, you know, looking in October, November, we've still got a couple of months, but there's not a lot of time. So we can't really sort of be sitting there thinking, we don't really know who, you know, 4 out of our 11 lineup is. You know, we've got to start working towards a finalized T20 lineup. Obviously, you can tweak it then, depending on who you're playing, depending on conditions and stuff like that. You know, do you 2 spinners or 1? How many rounders do you play and stuff like that? So you can sort of tweak that, but you've got to have a solid opening pair. You've got to have a solid middle order, and you've got to kind of understand what your bowling attack is. You know, who are your 2 primary seamers? Who's your death bowler, for example? You know, so Shamsi and Linda are your 2 spinners, but who's going to be a front line, you know, at the top of the order? Who's going to be sort of negotiating the middle overs? How are you going to use them? How are you going to use your bowlers? So that's the sort of thing that they need to sort of try and bring in. I think it's very frustrating that we're not going to see Sasanda Magala, who I think probably should have had a go in the West Indies if he was fit, because he's such a good death bowler. The problem is, you know, when he bowls in the middle orders, can be very expensive, but he's a tremendous death bowler. Death bowler. I think he's probably the best in the country, you know, in terms of being able to hit his Yorkers time and time again. So very frustrating that we won't get to see him against Ireland. It would have been a nice sort of way to bring him in and get that confidence up, and to really start sort of kicking on and playing a really big part in the Proteas side. But let me know what you think of the games that happen. What sort of sides would you like to see? What sort of players would you like to see tonight? What are your sort of your expectations? How do you think of this T20 series will go? Please do smash like on the video, subscribe to the channel. My name is Steven, and I'll chat to you guys soon.